It is exceedingly rare that a game of League of Legends comes to a close without some sort of teamfight happening. I'd wager it's actually the thing that decides most of your matches. You probably win the majority of your games by scoring an ace to secure Baron, and then by teamfighting again to close things out. This is something that all of us have experienced and will experience hundreds of more times with the game. Obviously, as such a large part of the game, challenger players are bound to be pretty good at it. But how? It's common knowledge that challenger players have played the game a lot. And you may think that they've seen every combination of champion involved in a fight, so they must have just memorized how each scenario will play out. But this couldn't be further from the truth. To prove that, there are 162 champions in League of Legends. That means that in any 5v5 match on Summoner's Rift, there are a possible 2,584,164,477,130,236 possible combinations of champions, also known as 2.584 times 10 to the 15th, or a really, really big number. If you're having trouble visualizing that, this number is so big that you are over 8 million times more likely to win the lottery grand prize than you are to have the exact same team comps in a game twice. Or let's imagine that you play 100,000 games of League of Legends over your lifetime. You have just about a 0.0000000000387% chance of seeing these same 10 champions in a game more than once. Of course, the chance that someone selects any individual champion is not truly random, so this math isn't perfect, but regardless, it is astronomically unlikely that you can ever rely on seeing the same champions to predict how a fight will play out. This also doesn't even include the fact that players will be at different levels, have different items, and have different cooldowns than another game, even if you were to get the exact same teams. So how the hell are you supposed to get better at teamfighting if it's really this complex, and why are challenger players just really good at it? We need to figure out a way to simplify teamfights down to something that anyone can understand, and that's exactly what this guide is going to do. While your role in a teamfight might change based on specific factors in each game, there are generally only 3 things that you need to figure out in order to make teamfighting much, much easier. We're going to share the secrets that let you simplify all the scenarios that you've never seen before, and League of Legends as a whole. And by the way, simplifying League of Legends is what makes our teaching at skillcap.com so effective. Take our brand new Master in Minutes course on wave control. Each video in this course teaches you one concept in less time than it takes to start a game of League of Legends. This is all part of the design, so while you wait for your next game, you can learn freezing, fast pushing, slow pushing, bouncing waves, the list keeps going, all in just a few minutes to maximize your improvement rate. Seems too good to be true? Well, don't worry, we're backed up by a rank up guarantee. If you don't significantly improve while actively using skill caps, then you get your money back, no questions asked. We're the only service that can offer this because you'll actually see results. So what are you waiting for? Click the link in the description below and get the rank you've always wanted. All right, now let's get into today's guide. The first question we need to be able to answer is, should I take the fight? And for this, we need to tackle the fact that teamfighting is not a simple yes or no question. It's not as easy as saying, well, we win this, let's fight, or we lose, so don't. In reality, it's very similar to laning. When you're looking for trades in lane, for example, you have this whole footsies thing going on. Both people wiggle back and forth and look for an opportunity to strike. They then try to provoke each other and use small spacing errors to exploit weaknesses. In the same vein that teamfighting is difficult to solve, it would be pretty difficult to answer any question about, should I trade here? When the answer for both is usually, it depends. What I'm getting at is that answering, should I fight, is fluid, and sometimes can switch from yes to no almost instantaneously. So what exactly are we looking for? One idea, numbers advantage. This sounds extremely simple, but there's definitely a lot to it, so bear with me. You'd be surprised that the #1 mistake for teamfighting is literally just opting into fights where you have less players than the other team. That's obviously a no-no 90% of the time, but if that was all the advice you needed, then this guide wouldn't exist. In reality, fights are rarely straightforward 5v5s. More often than not, there are going to be small pockets where the fight is relatively divided. It could be all 10 players in a general area, but you could have a grouping of 2v1 and 3v4 within that, or something like a 1v4 and a 4v1. Because of this, we can't just look at how many people are in the area, we also need to consider who gets to things first and the groupings. Let's use this example game to explain a simple situation. In this match, Nidalee is down 2 levels on her opponent, Viego. so it's a safe bet to assume that she probably doesn't win the 1v1. However, if we think about who could potentially participate in this fight, we need to account for the top laners and the mid laners. Initially, you might just want to say, don't take this fight, as it looks like everyone is just about equidistant from it. But this doesn't take into account the fact that not everyone is guaranteed to come to the fight at the same pace, or even at the same time. For Nidalee, that makes the question of should we take the fight rather unclear, and now we need to enter the next phase of thinking. If there is any potential whatsoever of us having numbers advantage in a fight, we can entertain it. And by that, you'll quite literally want to dance just like Nidalee is doing here to stall for time. But stay in range of the other player so that you can choose to go in or leave at a moment's notice. We can recognize here that she's not jumping in at all, even after landing a spear. But once we get a clear signal, which comes from the form of Talon jumping the wall, now we can see the division in the fight. Ryze may be in the general area, but he's not actually close enough to impact it, meaning it's really a 2v1, and we can consider Ryze to be having a 1v0. Of course, Viego is easily picked off and this fight is successful, but this was a simple example for a reason. We wanted to highlight that there are really just 3 different modes you have in choosing if you should fight. One is the simplest, and choosing to avoid the fight altogether. This is if you just have no hope of gaining numbers advantage at all. Your team will never get there first, or you just don't have any backup whatsoever. Whatever the reason, you can just leave. However, the second and third modes are a bit more interesting. If you don't have numbers advantage right away, but might, it can be in your best interest to stall. In this case, Nidalee was able to delay the fight and await a potential numbers advantage. When not all 5 from both teams are present, it's very frequent that one side will receive help before the other. And if that is your team, it's in your best interest to not rush things, as you'll be giving your opponent exactly what they want. The third mode is to rush the fight immediately. When you finally do have numbers advantage, or maybe you even had it from the start, it's likely that that advantage will go away as time passes. The enemy team members will come from other parts of the map and reinforce. Essentially, you don't want to let them stall. Once Talon hops the wall and Ryze is split off, we need to make sure the play ends as quickly as possible, before Ryze can regroup and we lose our advantage. It's always important to keep in mind what mode you should actually be in before and during fights, and we can use a later example to show why this is so important. As Viego is walking into River, he initially gets a spear thrown at him from the bush. With this, we can accurately pinpoint where everyone is on the map. Our Ryze is dead, Nidalee is in the bush, and everyone else is showing on the map. Basically, there is a 4v3 on the bot side of the map if everyone is there. But if we rush a play bottom, we will always have the inside track to beat Nidalee there, and we can make a 3v2 in our favor before help can arrive. Because of this, Viego sprints towards bottom. As soon as he arrives, Blitz hits a hook and they're able to execute a quick dive and get a kill. Now we need to reassess. We still have numbers advantage here with a 3v2, but Talon is yet to leave mid, and once that happens, our advantage goes away and this fight will turn into a 3v3. We are definitely still in mode 3 where we need to rush this play. Unfortunately, overconfident with their initial kill, the red team doesn't quite realize that their advantage is fleeting, and lingers around to try and exert more pressure. If they just realized this, then these 2 kills to Talon would have been completely avoided. As a general rule of thumb, I think it's best to assume the absolute worst case scenario. While these examples did have complete information, aka we knew where everyone was, that won't always be the case. If you don't know where someone is, just assume they will be at the fight and evaluate your mode with that in mind. Okay, so now we know a bit about how to choose our fights and what mode we need to be in, but there's plenty more to discuss, namely step 2, which is who do you actually decide to hit? We just discussed how pockets will be created where smaller groupings within larger fights will pop up. Remember the idea of 3v2s and 2v3s existing within fights. But when you have access to multiple targets, what do? Again, there is a lot of nuance in this, but for the most part, especially in low elo, you can stick to one simple rule. Target the player that is most isolated while also not isolating yourself. Let's use one of my students' replays to discuss. He's about to finish Dragon, and it looks like his group of 3 is staring at the opponent's equal-sized group. However, he does have Echo coming to reinforce, so we might be inclined to stall this fight out a little and wait to see if our backup gets here first. Of course, this is solo queue and his Zyra flashes in like a maniac, resulting in us getting to this position. The enemy Lux is incredibly low and out of this fight, so We have two main choices here. We could continue going forward towards Twitch and try to fight the 1v1, or turn to help with Yasuo. Which one would you rather do? While Echo's reinforcement and the rest of our team might be able to handle Yasuo on their own, allowing us to go on Twitch, a few problems would arise in that case. If we choose to put ourselves where Twitch is currently, we will find ourselves in the middle of 3 people. Yasuo, Lux, and Twitch would all be able to turn and hit us, and we would essentially be opting ourselves into a 1v3. On the contrary, if we go after Yasuo, he will be in a potential 1v4, and it's important to note that at this point, Twitch is actually not participating in this fight at all. With no ultimate available, he's not in range to actually hit anyone on our team, and is useless until he decides to walk back into range. We can make use of this slight moment in time where Twitch is unable to help, and shift our attention to Yasuo for the time being. In this fight, you can see that Twitch actually doesn't get a single auto-in until Yasuo is already dead, and by choosing to eliminate targets one by one, it'll be much easier to win. If we don't keep track of where our teammates are and how these things update in real time, it can backfire quickly. Let's look at another student's replay for an example, and to bring up our third step. Teamfights do not stay in place once they start. They will often move, and we need to figure out where they should move to. This is a relatively simple idea, but you usually want to have the teamfight shift not only towards your own vision to avoid walking into enemy ambushes, but also towards your own team members. Let's use everything we've learned so far and try to apply this new concept as well. Miss Fortune is barely off screen here, but does have a long range with her ult and E, so keep that in mind. With that being said, we need to figure out which mode to use here, the target selection, and also where the fight should move towards. Take a second to think and pause if you need to. Let's get into it. With the enemy Zyra dead and Darius top lane, this fight is a 3v3 currently, and has the potential to be a 4v3 since Caitlyn is coming from base. This means that we likely want to stall the fight until Caitlyn gets here, but you might notice one thing. Yasuo is very far away from the fight and can't participate right now. If we were to target Bel'Veth right now with ultimate, we would potentially kill her before Yasuo even gets in range. This conflicts with the idea of stalling the fight, but actually gives us the option to rush the play if we wanted to. Miss Fortune can assist from just outside of range, and we will have a 3v2 for a brief window of time. This will happen quite often. You might have 2 potential answers to a fight, and that's completely normal. The important thing is to understand why your play is going to work, and to not lose sight of that or combine it with other ideas. If we want to rush the play, we need to do so before Yasuo closes the gap. And if we want to stall and wait for Caitlyn, we should try to dance outside of range and entertain that idea. If we allow the fight to drag on here, we will notice how the fight has completely changed within 2 seconds. Now, it's an even 3v3 with Yasuo involved, and there aren't really any isolated targets for us to try and hit. If we were to dive Bel'Veth, we would be putting ourselves in a situation where we are quite overextended. In fact, that's what happens in this game, and you can see the outcome yourself. Silas wasn't aware of Warwick wanting to walk forward, and the fight was brute force anyways. Of course, by the time Caitlyn gets here, it's already decided, and it's a convincing win for the enemy team. Let's rewind now and talk about how this could have been played differently. If we also factor in the idea that fights should want to move towards our reinforcements and away from theirs, we would ideally want this to move northeast to make Caitlyn arrive faster. If we move southwest into river, Caitlyn will only take longer to get to this fight, and it'll be more difficult for us to stall for that amount of time. In addition to this, we need to update whether our teammates are actually on board with the fight. While it initially looks like a 3v3, take note of how Silas moves here. He only clicks backwards and retreats. Even if this were to be a really great fight to take, our teammates drastically alter the numbers in a fight, and a 3v3 can turn into a 3v1 extremely quickly. We must always try to keep track of our opponent's locations as well as our own teammates to continue to update our decision making with regards to number advantages. Let's look at our example replay one more time to analyze a late game teamfight involving both full teams. Caitlyn and Nami walk very far up to siege mid lane here, even knowing that they have 3 members of the team that cannot be there, and a potential group of 5 waiting for them in Fog of War. Of course, this leads to the red team punishing them for their lack of numbers and killing them both pretty easily. Like I said, it's best to assume the worst case scenario, and there's no reason why either of them should die here. But now, we have other threats to deal with for the red team. The enemy Scion is flanking them and their topside jungle. However, they do have pretty great vision here, and it's safe to assume that Scion is alone. On top of this, their gangplank is in top lane, which means their reinforcements would come from above Sion as well. I think it's obvious with what we know now that this fight should be pushed towards Sion, as well as gangplank. Moving it away from where the enemy mid and jungle are likely to be is best. But you'll see that a completely winnable situation is thrown due to the fact that the fight is moved in the wrong direction. Take note of where Jhin is in this fight. He could have at any point hit Sion and run past him to put himself on Gangplank's side, but he stays on the side that his opponents are likely to come from instead. That leads to them being in a position where the entire team is stuck between both groups of the enemy team, and the result is a complete disaster. Of course, number advantages weren't the only thing here. The extremely poor positioning contributed to how badly this fight went. And in general, of course we aim to simplify the game and team fights as much as we can. But you're also going to have to just make adjustments based on things you've never seen before. Inherently, that's a part of the game and probably one of the most difficult things about improving at League. But if we do boil teamfights down to these 3 steps, we at least get a solid foundation of knowing what to do in a fight, and maybe a way of actually figuring out what went right or wrong. A large portion of the player base just fails to conceptualize teamfights as a whole, and if you are able to do so, you'll be a huge leg up on the vast majority of your opposition. To recap, identify what mode your fight should be in. Do you want to avoid the fight altogether, stall, or rush it? Then, be on the lookout for targets that will isolate themselves, or the smallest group that you can look to pick off. It's easiest to kill small groups one by one and tackle the larger ones later. And lastly, aim to keep track of where the fight should move while it's happening, and be careful of moving towards enemy reinforcements and away from your own. These 3 tips will drastically increase your efficiency in fights, and make your life a lot easier. So let us know how this works for you. And remember, if you found this guide helpful, then you're going to love our service at skillcaps.com. Take our brand new Master in Minutes course on wave control. Each video in the course teaches you one concept in less time than it takes to start a game of League of Legends. This is all part of the design, so while you wait for your next game, you can learn freezing, fast pushing, slow pushing, bouncing waves, the list goes on. All in just a few minutes to maximize your improvement rate. Seems too good to be true? Well, don't worry. We're backed by a rank up guarantee. If you don't significantly improve while actively using skill caps, then you get your money back, no questions asked. We're the only service that can offer this because you will actually see results. So what are you waiting for? Click the link in the description below and get the rank you've always wanted. Thanks so much for watching, and until next time, good luck in your ranked climb.